The Sabbath, a Grail-inspired clarification of its true spiritual meaning. Preface. The call to rediscover what was never lost. Humanity speaks often of the Sabbath, yet few truly understand what it is, why it exists, or how deeply it is woven into the very structure of creation. For many, it has become a religious obligation, a calendar ritual, a denominational badge, or a cultural tradition handed down with little reflection. For others, it is an outdated remnant of ancient law, rendered meaningless by modern life. And for still others, it is a source of confusion, tied to fear, guilt, or restrictive doctrines that suffocated the very joy it was meant to bestow. But the Sabbath is none of these things. Like so many sacred realities, it has been covered over by human interpretations, diluted by intellectual reasoning, and distorted by emotionalism and religious authority. What should have been a living stream of refreshment became a rigid structure. What was designed as liberation became a burden. What should have lifted humanity into harmony with divine rhythms instead has become a point of division, dispute, and mechanized observance. Yet truth cannot be lost, only hidden. This book shines the light of the Grail Message upon the Sabbath. To free it from dogma. To loosen it from the chains of tradition. To restore its spiritual meaning. And to reawaken humanity to the sacred rhythm that pulses through every fiber of creation. The Sabbath is not a day that God needs. It is a law built into creation that the human spirit needs. For order. For renewal. For clarity. For development. For connection with the light. It is a cosmic breathing rhythm. It is rest not as inactivity, but as attunement. It is worship not as ritual, but as alignment. It is holiness not as externals, but as inner awakening. In a world driven by noise, haste, and exhaustion, the Sabbath returns as a teacher, reminding mankind that life falls apart wherever divine rhythms are ignored. May this book guide the earnest reader into a deeper recognition of the sacred laws governing existence. May it dissolve misconceptions that bind the soul. May it uplift, correct, and enlighten, restoring the Sabbath to its rightful spiritual radiance. Introduction. The forgotten sacred rhythm of creation. There is a rhythm woven into the universe, a rise and fall, a pulse, a breathing, a flow. Everything in creation moves within this harmony. Galaxies spiral by it, the seasons obey it, the tides answer to it, and even the human body rests within its cycles of waking, sleeping, working, and renewal. The Sabbath belongs to this rhythm. Before any religion claimed it. Before any commandment named it. Before any nation observed it. The Sabbath already existed. As a law. As a principle. As a protective, uplifting force within creation. It is the cosmic pause that allows strength to flow again. It is the divine interval through which renewal descends. It is the spiritual breath that prevents the human soul from suffocating under the weight of earthly existence. Yet humanity has forgotten this. Today, people run without direction, work without rest, live without reflection, and strive without inner grounding. Even when one stops physically, the inner machinery continues. Anxieties churn, thoughts race, emotions spiral, and the spirit remains exhausted. This is not rest. This is not Sabbath. Many observe the Sabbath outwardly while their spirit remains in turmoil. Others reject the Sabbath because they reject the distortions surrounding it. Still others cling to rigid doctrines while missing its living essence. But creation remains untouched by human confusion. The Sabbath continues to stand as one of the most profound gifts to mankind. A call to step out of the chaos of self-will and into the harmony of divine will. In this book, we will explore what the Sabbath truly is, how it operates as a spiritual and radiational law, why it was given to humanity, how it was misunderstood and misused, how it can be rediscovered in its purity, what it means for the human spirit today, and how every person, regardless of background, can enter into its blessing. This is not a denominational teaching. It is not an argument for a particular calendar day. It is not an attempt to revive ancient legalism. This is a revelation of the cosmic principle of Sabbath, illuminated by the light of truth, and explained through the clarifying lens of the Grail Message. The purpose is not to lead anyone back to an old practice, but to lead them forward into understanding, to the living essence that religions only dimly reflected. The Sabbath is purity. The Sabbath is order. The Sabbath is renewal. The Sabbath is alignment. The Sabbath is spiritual protection. And the moment humanity understands this, the Sabbath becomes not a restriction, but a liberation, a doorway into harmony with the laws of creation, a refuge for the weary soul, a wellspring of clarity, a place where the Spirit breathes again. This book invites you to walk through that doorway. Part 1. The True Nature of the Sabbath. Understanding the spiritual essence, origin, and purpose of the Sabbath. Chapter 1. The Sabbath in Creation, a radiational reality, not a ritual. The Sabbath did not begin with Moses, religion, commandments, or doctrines. Its origin lies far deeper, woven into the very structure of creation itself. Before any human foot touched the earth, before any prophet received a law, the rhythm of rest and renewal was already pulsating throughout the universe. In the Grail Message, Abdrushan reveals that all creation operates in cycles of radiation, ebb and flow, tension and release. These cycles appear in everything: day and night, waking and sleeping, seedtime and harvest, the beating of the heart, the inhaling and exhaling of breath. Each movement is a living testimony that creation breathes, and in this breath lies the foundational principle that later became known as the Sabbath. The Sabbath, therefore, is not the invention of any religion. It is a law of balance, a radiational pause built into creation to maintain harmony. Just as a musical note requires space between beats to form rhythm, creation requires intervals for recalibration. Humans later received this principle as a commandment, not because God suddenly introduced it, but because mankind had strayed so far from nature that they needed to be reminded of a law that was always there. When Scripture says, God rested, it is not describing fatigue or limitation. It reveals the holy interval in the great creative cycle, the stabilizing phase in which all newly created forms attune themselves to their source. This interval, the archetype of the Sabbath, remains active today and radiates through all planes of creation. Thus, the Sabbath is a cosmic principle, not a ceremonial observance. It is a radiational pause required by every creature who draws power from spiritual currents. When men later turned it into a ritual, they merely externalized what had always been an internal, living law. Understanding this shifts our perspective from obligation to alignment. The Sabbath is not something to heap through rules, it is something to enter, by harmonizing oneself with the rhythm of creation. Chapter 2. Rest as alignment, the Sabbath and the natural laws. Rest is not idleness, it is not inactivity, it is alignment. Everything in creation moves according to perfect order. Light radiates, energy flows, matter vibrates, and all these movements follow the sacred laws, the law of the cycle, of balance, of reciprocal action. Rest fits into this network as a divine moment when the creature aligns itself with these laws. Every being draws strength from currents that flow from above. These currents never cease, but the creature must open itself regularly to receive them. Rest, therefore, is the act of stepping out of the turbulence of one's own exertion to re-enter the natural stream of renewal. Nature itself demonstrates this truth. Soil rejuvenates after a fallow season. Rivers purify during slow flow cycles. Trees cease their outward growth during winter to consolidate inwardly. Animals retreat instinctively when the rhythm of rest calls them. Man alone resists this law, often to his own harm. In the Grail Message, the laws of creation are described as living, objective forces. Whoever obeys them receives strength, whoever violates them suffers weakness and confusion. The Sabbath, understood spiritually, is therefore not a day of prohibition but a state of correct positioning within the laws. When a human being rests in the right way, calm, receptive, introspective, grateful, he becomes aligned with the law of radiations and receives purification in his thoughts, clarity in his intuition, and strengthening in his spirit. When he violates this pause by restlessness, overactivity, indulgence, or emotional agitation, he short-circuits himself from these strengthening currents. Thus, the Sabbath is not merely rest. It is the alignment of the human spirit with the natural order, so that light can flow through him without obstruction. Chapter 3. The Spiritual Origin of holy days, and divine rhythms. Holy days are not arbitrary dates chosen by tradition or religion. They arise from the same spiritual rhythms that give meaning to the Sabbath. Every plane of creation pulses with life, ascending, descending, opening, intensifying, according to divine timing. These pulses form periods of heightened radiational purity, which ancient peoples recognized instinctively. Long before calendars or doctrines, humanity felt the presence of these cosmic rhythms. Times when prayer seemed clearer. Moments when intuition became brighter. Seasons when renewal or reflection felt naturally necessary. These were the original, holy days, not because man declared them, but because creation itself marked them. Over time, prophets and spiritually awakened individuals recognized these radiational peaks and instructed their followers to use them as moments of retreat, purification, thanksgiving, or courage. Later generations preserved the dates but lost the understanding. A holy day is simply a period in which the veil between the human spirit and higher radiations becomes thinner, allowing stronger inspiration, deeper recognition, clearer correction, and more powerful spiritual upliftment. This is why festivals in all cultures, when correctly understood, always involve reflection, gratitude, cleansing, sacrifice, and renewal. The spiritual purpose was never external celebration, it was inner realignment. The Sabbath belongs to this family of divine rhythms. It is the weekly pulse, one of the shortest cycles, in which a human being can retune himself. Those who correctly enter these rhythms grow spiritually. Those who treat them as rituals or burdens remain unchanged. Thus, holy days are not demands from religion, they are gifts from creation, moments when the light draws nearer, inviting the human spirit to awaken. Chapter 4. Human beings as receivers, why rest is a command of nature. To understand the Sabbath, one must first understand the human being. Man is not a self-sustaining generator, he is a receiver. His spirit draws power from higher planes, just as his body draws oxygen from air. When a receiver is overloaded, uncalibrated, or constantly on, it burns out or becomes distorted. The human spirit receives through intuition. But intuition is only clear when the inner environment is calm. Noise, whether emotional, mental, or physical, interferes with reception. This is why nature itself commands rest. Not religion, nature. When Scripture says, "Remember the Sabbath," the deeper meaning is, remember your dependence on higher power. Remember you are a receiver. Remember to open yourself to renewal. A radio must be tuned to pick up a signal. A satellite dish must be aligned. A seed must rest in the soil before it can germinate. Likewise, the human spirit must periodically enter a state of inward stillness to remain clear and receptive. This is not optional, it is a law of spiritual physics. When a person refuses rest, intuition becomes dull. Decisions become erratic. Emotions become unstable. Health begins to break down. Many of humanity's crises, personal and collective, arise because men try to operate independently of the divine rhythm. The Sabbath, therefore, is not a religious demand but a lifeline for the human spirit. Through rest, a person renews his strength, clears his inner channels, and reconnects to the source that sustains him. Chapter 5. The Sabbath is a spiritual pause for purification and reorientation. True Sabbath rest is not sleep or leisure alone. It is purification, a cleansing of thoughts, desires, and inner motivations. It is also reorientation, a returning to the right direction when one has drifted off course. Throughout the week, human beings accumulate emotional debris, mental clutter, spiritual dullness. These distort the radiational environment around them. The Sabbath offers a sacred pause in which the accumulated heaviness can fall away, if the person becomes still enough. In its purest sense, the Sabbath is a turning of the soul toward the light. It is a moment to ask, am I aligned with the laws of truth? Are my motives pure? Am I drifting into vanity, fear, or impatience? What burdens have I carried unnecessarily? What gratitude have I failed to express? This pause realigns the human spirit. It purifies by illumination. It strengthens by reorientation. The Grail Message explains that humanity often rushes through life without reflection, like a traveler sprinting without checking his compass. The Sabbath interrupts this unconscious momentum and forces a return to clarity. This is why, when properly observed, intuition brightens, conscience awakens, calmness develops, purpose becomes clearer, and strength flows anew. In this sense, the Sabbath is one of the greatest gifts given to mankind. It is a weekly opportunity to reconnect with meaning, truth, and direction, to ensure that one's path remains aligned with the will of God. And when man finally understands the Sabbath in this spiritual way, he ceases to argue about days, doctrines, or rituals. He seeks instead the living rest that transforms him inwardly and draws him ever closer to the light. Part 2. Misconceptions about the Sabbath. Correcting humanity's most widespread errors. Chapter 6. The Sabbath is not a day of idleness. Humanity has long mistaken the Sabbath for laziness wrapped in spirituality. Countless people approach it as a day to do nothing, believing that inactivity itself makes them obedient to God. Yet rest, from the perspective of the laws of creation, is not the same as idleness. Idleness dulls the spirit, rest strengthens it. True Sabbath rest is active alignment, not passive stagnation. It is the conscious stepping out of the noise of the outer world in order to re-enter the natural currents that nourish the spirit. In fact, the laws of creation, movement, attraction of homogeneous species, pressure of radiation, and the cycle of renewal, reject idleness. Everything in creation is in motion. Even when a seed rests in the soil, it is dynamically preparing for birth. Even when night falls, the earth continues its rotation. Thus, a Sabbath spent in lethargy, oversleeping, mindless entertainment, empty chatter, violates the very principle it is meant to protect. Such a person may be doing nothing outwardly, yet inwardly he is suppressing the radiational uplift intended for that sacred pause. Idleness attracts spiritual heaviness, true rest invites clarity. The Sabbath calls for inner activity, reflection, purification, listening, observing, realignment. The spirit should work more clearly on the Sabbath, not less. It should rise above the fog of the week and stand before the light with renewed receptivity. Therefore, the Sabbath is not a holiday for the body but a holy day for the spirit. It is not a command to stop moving, but an invitation to move correctly, quietly, inwardly, consciously, gratefully. Chapter 7. How religions turned a living law into tradition and rule. Throughout history, humans received divine impulses but covered them with layers of custom, ritual, and rigid doctrine. The Sabbath suffered this same fate. What began as a natural rhythm embedded in creation was gradually reduced to a set of rules enforced by religious authorities. Instead of teaching the living meaning of the Sabbath, religions appointed themselves guardians of ceremonial behavior. They legislated what could or could not be done, often ignoring the inner state of the worshipper. Do not walk more than this distance, do not carry this weight, do not light this fire. The Sabbath became a list of prohibitions rather than a door to renewal. This shift from essence to form is one of humanity's most tragic spiritual errors. When religions lose the living connection to the laws of creation, they must rely on rules to maintain relevance. Ritual replaces understanding. Conformity replaces conviction. Fear of violation replaces longing for spiritual alignment. But the laws of creation cannot be regulated by man. They function independently of traditions or ecclesiastical interpretations. A person who keeps the rules may still miss the Sabbath entirely if his soul remains restless, anxious, or disordered. Conversely, one who breaks a human-made regulation may nevertheless observe the Sabbath correctly if his spirit is in harmonious alignment. The Sabbath is not a human invention but a divine radiation. No religious authority can alter its purpose. They may alter practices, but never the law behind it. Thus, the way back is simple: strip away tradition, return to essence. Replace rule with understanding. Replace ritual with lived experience. Replace fear with awareness. Only then can the Sabbath breathe again as a living gift. Chapter 8. The error of external observance without inner quiet. It is possible to sit still yet remain in deep spiritual unrest. Many observe the Sabbath outwardly. They attend services, avoid heavy work, speak softly, and participate in rituals, yet their inner world remains chaotic, tense, and noisy. The greatest misunderstanding is the belief that the Sabbath is primarily external. True Sabbath observance begins internally. One may dress in sacred clothing, kneel in worship, or shut down all devices, yet still fail to experience the Sabbath because the spirit continues to whirl in restless thoughts, unresolved conflicts, and emotional agitation. The laws of creation respond not to appearances but to radiations. A noisy soul cannot receive the uplift of the Sabbath any more than a stormy lake can reflect the sun. The Sabbath requires inner quiet, which is not the suppression of thought but the elevation of thought. It is the conscious gathering of one's energies into clarity, sincerity, and openness. It is the casting away of bitterness, resentment, haste, and worry so that the spirit may stand upright. External observance is good only when it supports this inner stillness. But external observance alone is hollow, and even harmful, for it deceives the individual into thinking he has fulfilled a spiritual law. The Sabbath asks for inward truthfulness, not performance. It asks for purification, not ceremony. It asks for attentiveness, not compliance. No outer gesture can substitute for inner peace. No ritual can replace the radiational quiet of a soul turned toward the light. Chapter 9. The confusion between Sabbath and cultural rest days. Many cultures have fixed rest days, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, public holidays, and work-free weekends. Over centuries, humanity began to confuse these cultural rest days with the true Sabbath impulse lying within creation. But a cultural rest day is determined by society. The Sabbath is determined by spiritual law. A society may declare any day as its day of rest for practical reasons, economic cycles, religious customs, colonial influence, or labor policies. These rest days are often beneficial for physical and mental recovery, but they do not automatically carry the radiational significance of the Sabbath. The true Sabbath is the recurring spiritual pause woven into the rhythm of existence. It is not tied to calendars but to radiation cycles, just as tides follow lunar rhythms rather than human scheduling. The spiritual currents that nourish the human soul operate independently of which day a nation chooses to close its shops or offices. Therefore, a person may observe Sunday while missing the Sabbath. Another may work on Sunday yet find harmony with the Sabbath through inner alignment. Nations may shift their weekly rest day, but the Sabbath rhythm remains untouched, unaffected, unaltered. The confusion arises because humanity often interprets spiritual laws through cultural lenses. But the Sabbath is not culture, it is creation. It is not a tradition, it is a radiation. It is not a social agreement, it is a cosmic cycle of purification and renewal. Cultural rest days refresh the body. The Sabbath refreshes the spirit. Where they overlap, the human being benefits greatly. Where they diverge, the spirit must follow the higher law, not the human calendar. Chapter 10. Why the day of the week matters less than the radiational state. Many argue over whether the Sabbath should be Saturday or Sunday. Some insist on Friday. Others fight over proper hours, proper names, and proper customs. Yet all such debates miss the central truth. The Sabbath is not defined by the day but by the radiational condition of the human soul. In the laws of creation, time is secondary, inner state is primary. A person may perfectly observe the correct day, according to tradition yet remain spiritually disconnected. Another may gather himself on a different day, enter genuine quiet, and receive the spiritual uplift intended by the Sabbath. What matters is the readiness of the spirit, not the alignment of the calendar. The Sabbath is like a spiritual window, open to every human being who chooses inward stillness, regardless of the day. There are indeed natural radiational peaks built into the weekly rhythm of creation, but they are not bound to human arguments about names or cultural week structures. A week in one culture does not equal a week in another. Calendars have changed countless times. Yet the spiritual rhythm has never changed. Thus, what matters most is: are you inwardly still? Are you consciously receptive? Are you aligned with the light? Are you using the pause for purification and renewal? These determine whether a person enters the Sabbath, not the day printed on a calendar. Humanity has placed tremendous emphasis on external synchronization while ignoring inner transformation. Yet the Sabbath invites man to step into living harmony, not religious correctness. When man understands this, he finally stops arguing and starts awakening. Part 3. The spiritual laws behind the Sabbath. The invisible forces that make the Sabbath necessary for the soul. Chapter 11. The Law of Rest and Renewal. Rest is not a human invention. It is not a cultural convenience, nor a religious tradition. Rest is woven into creation itself, a movement born out of the will of God. Just as night follows day, and tides follow the pull of the moon, rest follows activity as a divinely ordained necessity for renewal. Every creature, every plant, every cell obeys this rhythm. Only the human being, endowed with free will, imagines he can escape it. The law of rest and renewal operates like a breathing mechanism in the spiritual universe. Movement outward, work, activity, engagement, is only one half of the cycle. The inward movement, rest, collection, renewal, is the other half. Without the inward motion, the outward motion loses strength, clarity, and harmony. That is why people who live in constant tension gradually lose their ability to think clearly, feel purely, or decide rightly. Their inner threads become twisted, overstretched, and out of tune. The Sabbath is not a command for rest, it is an allowance, a provision for the human spirit to inhale again. In a world where human beings drown themselves in noise, speed, anxiety, and unending demands, the Sabbath emerges as a rescue rope thrown from above. The law itself opens a gateway, a window through which renewal can flow to the weary soul. Creation vibrates in waves of rhythm. When the human spirit aligns with these waves, it gains strength effortlessly, like a sailor who catches the wind. When it resists them, it must struggle, push, and force its progress, often collapsing in exhaustion or confusion. Rest resets the radiations around a person, loosening darkened connections and restoring clarity. Renewal is not simply relaxation, it is spiritual recalibration. True rest is not sleep. True rest is release, letting go of the accumulated tensions of the week, the stresses of the mind, the weights on the soul. In stillness, the spirit reorders its energies. The Sabbath is the point at which this spiritual rearrangement becomes most possible. This is why activities that stimulate the lower senses, noise, entertainment, gossip, frantic busyness, nullify the effect of the Sabbath. They fill the inner vessel with new burdens before the old ones have fallen away. Rest, in its spiritual form, is a cleansing. Renewal is the result. The law of rest and renewal stands as a reminder. The human spirit cannot give continuously unless it regularly receives. And it cannot receive unless it becomes still. Chapter 12. The Law of Spiritual Receptivity and Silence. Silence is not emptiness. It is openness. It is the fertile ground on which spiritual enlightenment descends. Human beings imagine that they grow spiritually through effort, study, or ritual. They forget the law of receptivity, the truth that the spirit can only absorb help from above when it becomes still enough to hear. This is the core of the Sabbath, a deliberate withdrawal from noise so that the spirit may rise into clarity. Within creation, every spiritual blessing flows downward like sunlight. But just as dust-filled water cannot reflect light, so a restless soul cannot receive spiritual nourishment. Thoughts, worries, expectations, and emotional agitation act like clouds, blocking the radiations meant to reach the human spirit. The Sabbath provides an atmosphere where these clouds can dissolve. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of resistance. When resistance ceases, receptivity becomes possible. The Grail Message explains repeatedly that everything in creation stands under laws that are exact and incorruptible. One such law is that spiritual power cannot penetrate a turbulent vessel. This is why humanity, despite praying loudly, singing fervently, and building temples of stone, often remains empty. The noise of their inner life repels what they claim to seek. The Sabbath is the weekly opportunity for a human being to open the gate through silence. Not ritual silence. Not the artificial quiet of religious performance, but inner silence, softening the will, calming the emotions, focusing the thoughts, letting the spirit breathe. Where silence dwells, enlightenment can descend. Where agitation dominates, even divine help rebounds. Receptivity is an act of humility. I do not force, I listen. I do not demand, I open. I do not strive, I align. Through the Sabbath rhythm, Humans learn the posture that allows the light to reach them: stillness, humility, attentiveness. Without this posture, spiritual progress becomes impossible. The Sabbath is not about silence for one day. It is a weekly training to make silence possible in life. Chapter 13. The Law of Attraction and Purification in Periods of Stillness. In stillness, forces long hidden become visible. Radiations that were unnoticed become perceptible. This is why many people, when they finally stop moving, suddenly feel the burdens they have been carrying. It is not that the burdens increased, stillness simply reveals what activity concealed. The law of attraction operates with heightened intensity during spiritual quietude. What is similar attracts what is similar. Thus, during a Sabbath-structured rest, when the soul becomes calm, lighter radiations can draw near and cleanse the person. Purification occurs naturally as denser elements fall away. This is why moments of quiet often bring spontaneous reflection, remorse, or renewed clarity about past actions. The inner light stirs up what was buried. Conflicts, mistakes, and unresolved emotions rise, not to torment, but to be expelled. The Sabbath becomes a time of gentle but definite purification. But purification cannot occur in agitation. When the soul is restless, it attracts only what strengthens restlessness. When the soul is still, it attracts what strengthens stillness. Through the Sabbath, the human spirit re-enters the stream of upward-leading radiations. These radiations wash over the soul, bringing insight, correction, and a return to harmony. People who practice real Sabbath stillness often find new solutions arising effortlessly, relationships becoming clearer, or emotional heaviness lifting. Purification is not always pleasant. Stillness can reveal the shadows within. But that revelation is healing, not judgment. The Sabbath creates a safe and divinely supported environment for this unveiling. Through restful stillness, old energies are released. New energies are received. The soul reorganizes itself. The spirit regains its luminosity. The Sabbath is a cleansing current in the river of time, flowing every seventh wave. He who steps into it regularly emerges lighter and clearer. Chapter 14. The Sabbath is an instrument of reciprocal action. Reciprocal action is the law that ensures every seed produces a harvest. Whatever a human being sets in motion, through thought, word, or deed, returns to him multiplied. This law is not punishment, it is justice woven into creation. The Sabbath interacts with this law in a profound way. A human spirit that enters Sabbath stillness receives the fruits of past sowings with greater clarity. The quiet environment makes it easier to perceive what reciprocal action is currently operating in one's life. What seemed like confusion during the busy week becomes understandable in the Sabbath pause. Many people suffer because they never stop long enough to identify the causes behind their experiences. They run from difficulty to distraction, never noticing the returning wave of their own past actions. The Sabbath creates the conditions for a person to recognize why certain challenges persist, why certain relationships repeat patterns, why certain emotional states linger. Recognition is the first step toward correction. Furthermore, reciprocal action amplifies during Sabbath stillness. A human being who spends the Sabbath radiating gratitude, clarity, and humility strengthens the upward movement of his entire week. Likewise, he who fills the Sabbath with agitation, entertainment, or escapism reinforces the lower currents that bind him. Through the Sabbath, the law of reciprocal action becomes a tool of advancement instead of a source of suffering. What a human projects outward during the Sabbath becomes magnified in the days that follow. This is why ancient traditions often recognized the Sabbath as a blessing day. The blessing was not magical, it was lawful. When the soul aligns itself upward, everything built upon that alignment carries the same strength. The Sabbath is the weekly opportunity to redirect the consequences of one's life. Chapter 15. Rhythms, Cycles, and the Human Soul's Need for Recharging. Everything in creation moves in cycles: seasons, tides, planetary orbits, heartbeat, breathing. The human soul, too, lives by cycles. It cannot sustain a continuous stream of effort without phases of withdrawal. The Sabbath is part of the great spiritual rhythm that sustains human life. It is a weekly return to source. Just as a tree draws nutrients from the soil, the human spirit draws strength from the higher realms during moments of quiet. Without this periodic ascent, the soul withers. Many illnesses, emotional, mental, even physical, arise because the soul is starved of these recharging cycles. People live as though they are machines, forgetting that the spirit must breathe in its own atmosphere of light. When a person enters Sabbath stillness, the soul becomes permeable. Higher radiations penetrate it, strengthening intuition, sharpening perception, and restoring inner harmony. The spirit becomes luminous again, and this luminosity radiates throughout the physical body, influencing health, temperament, and clarity of judgment. The Sabbath is not merely rest from labor, it is nourishment. It is the spiritual equivalent of photosynthesis, a moment when the spirit absorbs what sustains it and converts it into life force for the week ahead. Those who disconnect themselves from these cycles suffer fatigue of the soul. They become irritable, confused, pessimistic, or spiritually numb. Life begins to feel heavy and meaningless. The Sabbath corrects this unnatural state by reconnecting the human being to the rhythms of creation. The Grail teachings remind us that all harmony arises from alignment with the rhythms of the light. The Sabbath is one of those rhythms. It stands as a weekly reminder that the human spirit is not self-sufficient. It must rise, receive, refresh, and return renewed. The one who honors this rhythm lives in a constant upward movement. Part 4. The Inner Meaning of Sabbath Rest. Beyond Rituals, Understanding the Inner Transformation. Chapter 16. The True Rest, Quieting the Intellect and Awakening the Spirit. The true meaning of Sabbath rest is not physical inactivity, nor the forced abandonment of everyday tasks. Rest, in the spiritual sense, is the liberation of the human spirit from the constant dominance of the earthly intellect. Humanity has long misunderstood this fundamental principle. People assumed that rest meant ceasing outer activity. But the will of God points to something far deeper, a temporary dethronement of the intellect so that the spirit can breathe again. From birth, the human being receives the intellect as a tool for navigating the material world. It is meant to serve the spirit, not rule over it. Yet through centuries of cultivation, humanity has inflated the intellect, granting it leadership in areas where it is blind. The Sabbath, from its inception, stands as a divine corrective, a recurring opportunity for man to loosen the chains of rational overactivity and turn inward toward the light. When the intellect grows restless, noisy, and dominant, it obstructs the quiet radiations that nourish the spirit. Every genuine spiritual prompting, every pure intuition, requires a certain silence. The Sabbath creates this atmosphere of silence, not externally enforced, but spiritually lived. It is a pause in the whirlwind of thinking, planning, worrying, calculating, and competing. It is the recovery of the human being's original posture, spirit above intellect, not intellect above spirit. Thus, the true meaning of Sabbath rest is inner realignment. It is the conscious act of releasing mental clutter so the inner being can awaken. It is not an escape from life, but a preparation for it. For when the spirit is strengthened, it acts with clarity, direction, and purity in the following days. A Sabbath observed in this way produces a human being who speaks differently, works differently, loves differently, and decides differently, because he is centered in his true self. In the Grail Message, we learn that the spirit must dominate for man to be whole. Sabbath rest is one of the Creator's rhythmic helps to ensure this dominance. And when practiced sincerely, it becomes not a ritual but a weekly spiritual rebirth. Chapter 17. The Sabbath is a time of radiational illumination. Every created thing vibrates within cycles of radiation. Human beings, being spiritual in core, are receptive to higher radiations whenever they become inwardly still. The Sabbath is marked by an intensified flow of spiritual radiations that promote clarity, purification, and upliftment. In earlier times, before traditions overshadowed truth, this intensification was felt. People sensed a natural quiet descending upon their inner life. Thoughts slowed, emotions stabilized, the spirit became more alert. This radiational condition was not tied to a calendar date but to a spiritual rhythm built into creation. Humanity later attached cultural days to it, Saturday, Sunday, etc., but the original vibration remains independent of human arrangements. During such radiational uplift, the inner being receives impressions that it normally misses. These impressions are not messages, in the sense people imagine. Rather, they are illumination, a brightening of consciousness. Ideas become clearer, mistakes become visible, solutions emerge organically. One understands oneself better and recognizes paths forward that previously seemed blurry. The Sabbath's illumination works like sunlight breaking through a darkened room. But for this light to enter, the windows of the soul must be clean. Noise, haste, and intellectual stubbornness fog the glass. Stillness polishes it. Gratitude opens it. Reverence draws the rays in. This is why the Sabbath cannot be observed mechanically. It requires willingness. If a person rushes all week and then collapses into entertainment, exhaustion, or noise on the Sabbath, he remains closed. But if he consciously slows the stream of thought, cultivates inner calm, and attunes himself to what is noble and pure, he becomes receptive. The Sabbath, therefore, is not merely a period of no work. It is a time of illumination, the moment in the week when the spirit can be most easily touched by higher radiations. He who enters this quiet enters into the light. Chapter 18. Spiritual Reflection, the Weekly Mirror for the Soul. Human beings rarely pause to examine the direction of their inner life. Days pass in duties, distractions, and endless activities. The Sabbath restores a weekly opportunity for spiritual reflection, turning the gaze inward to evaluate thoughts, words, deeds, and intentions. This reflection is not harsh self-judgment. It is clarity. The Sabbath allows one to see the week as a whole, from a higher vantage point. Actions lose the haze of impulse and appear in their true meaning. Relationships can be viewed with new understanding. Mistakes can be acknowledged without self-condemnation because the light of truth reveals them as stepping stones, not final verdicts. Reflection, in the spiritual sense, is not mental analysis. It is perception. It arises from the spirit when the intellect is quiet. It brings insights that intellect alone cannot produce. In this weekly mirror, the human being sees not only what he did, but who he has become in the past days. He perceives where he drifted from purity, where he acted from fear, pride, irritation, or impatience. He also sees moments when he aligned with the good, where love moved him, where help was given, where truth guided him. These recognitions strengthen his resolve to do better. In this way, the Sabbath becomes a guardian of spiritual growth. Without it, a person may continue for months or years in a wrong direction without noticing. But with regular reflection, adjustment becomes natural, continuous, and gentle. And week after week, these small corrections accumulate until they transform the entire course of a life. Chapter 19. Gratitude, Reverence, and Inner Listening. Where there is gratitude, the spirit rises. Where there is reverence, the soul opens. Where there is inner listening, guidance can enter. The Sabbath brings all three into harmony. Gratitude is not emotion, it is recognition. It is the acknowledgement of the Creator's help, protection, and generosity. When a human being pauses on the Sabbath to recognize the goodness flowing into his life, his spirit attunes to higher vibrations. Gratitude loosens tension and invites joy. It washes away complaints and renews strength for the path ahead. Reverence, however, is deeper still. It is not fear of God, nor worship of rituals. It is the quiet awareness of the sacredness of existence. Reverence opens the inner being to the greatness of the laws of creation and awakens humility. The Sabbath atmosphere supports this reverence, for its radiations heighten one's sensitivity to the noble and the pure. Inner listening completes the triad. When noise fades and the intellect recedes, the whisper of the spirit becomes audible. Not as a voice, not as words, but as a knowing, a gentle inner clarity. Many people live entire lives without hearing this silent guidance because they never become still enough. The Sabbath provides the stillness. Through these three, gratitude, reverence, and listening, the human being reconnects to the path intended for him. His burdens lighten, his inner world brightens, his decisions become more aligned with truth. Thus, the Sabbath is not simply a break. It is a deep spiritual realignment with the will of God. Chapter 20. How the Sabbath opens the way for higher guidance. Guidance from the higher realms cannot be forced, demanded, or mechanically summoned. It flows naturally when the inner soil is prepared. The Sabbath creates precisely this condition of openness and receptivity. During the week, the human spirit battles through material challenges. Work, relationships, responsibilities, and worldly concerns create tension. The intellect races. Emotions fluctuate. The spiritual antenna becomes dulled. But in the radiational quiet of the Sabbath, the atmosphere around the human soul changes. There is a softening, an opening, through which higher guidance can reach. This guidance does not appear as sudden revelations or dramatic visions. Rather, it manifests as a deep inner peace that clarifies decisions, a gentle prompting toward what is right, a sense of direction in confusing situations, a strengthened conscience, renewed inner courage, a clearer understanding of one's duties, the quiet certainty of the next step. This type of guidance is only possible when the spirit becomes receptive. And receptivity requires stillness. The Sabbath is, therefore, a bridge. It connects the earthly human being with the luminous currents descending from the higher spiritual planes. It is a weekly renewal of connection with the will of God. He who enters the Sabbath sincerely receives strength for the coming days. He goes forth with clearer sight, lighter burdens, and a stronger bond with truth. He becomes more capable of fulfilling his earthly tasks with love, wisdom, and clarity. Thus, the Sabbath is not merely a spiritual suggestion, it is a profound help extended by the Creator to every human soul. He who uses it wisely walks a brighter path. Part 5. The Consequences of Neglecting the Sabbath. What happens when the human being ignores spiritual rhythms? Chapter 21. Mental Exhaustion and the Collapse of Inner Clarity. Humanity today suffers from a peculiar kind of tiredness, a tiredness that sleep cannot cure. People wake up fatigued, go through the day overwhelmed, and lie down at night mentally drained. This exhaustion is not the natural tiredness of the body, it is the burnout of the inner being resulting from a lack of radiant replenishment. And the root of this exhaustion is often the continuous violation of the spiritual law of rest. The Sabbath, understood in its true sense, is a rhythmic pause built into creation to allow the human spirit to breathe, realign, and receive fresh strength from the luminous currents flowing through the universe. When a human being constantly pushes forward without entering this radiational stillness, the intellect begins to overheat. Thoughts become scattered, focus weakens, decision-making becomes impaired, the person becomes hyperactive outwardly but empty inwardly. This mental collapse is not a punishment, it is reciprocal action. When the spirit no longer provides guidance because it lacks quiet contact with the light, the intellect, which was meant to serve as a tool, becomes a tyrant. Anxiety increases, irritability rises, confusion deepens, and gradually, clarity departs. The Sabbath was given as a law of spiritual hygiene, a time when intellect must be laid aside so that the spirit can take the lead. Without this rhythm, the inner lamp flickers. Thought becomes mechanical, reactive, and shallow. Over time, the individual loses the ability to perceive truth intuitively and begins living from mental noise instead of inner clarity. Thus the neglect of Sabbath rest leads not merely to tiredness, but to the gradual collapse of inner orientation. Humanity today marches under this burden, not knowing that the cure lies in returning to the natural radiational rhythm which God Himself embedded into creation. Chapter 22. Emotional Turbulence and Radiational Pollution. Where the Sabbath is ignored, emotional health deteriorates. Human emotions, meant to be gentle waves flowing from the spirit, become stormy, unstable, and easily triggered. The lack of regular inward stillness means there is no moment when the emotional body can settle and cleanse itself from accumulated impressions. Every encounter, every conversation, every stressor, every disappointment leaves a radiational imprint. These impressions are meant to be dissolved during moments of inner calm. But when a human being lives without pause, without the sacred rhythm of spiritual rest, these impressions pile up like soot in the atmosphere of the soul. Emotional pollution expresses itself as unexplained mood swings, resentment and irritation, depressive heaviness, chronic anxiety, inability to forgive, hypersensitivity to small matters, emotional numbness. A polluted inner atmosphere distorts perception. The person no longer sees events as they are but through the clouded lens of accumulated inner debris. The Sabbath, properly understood, is a time of emotional cleansing. In the quiet radiations of rest, heavy vibrations loosen, dark layers lift, and the soul becomes light again. Without this rhythm, emotional storms intensify until the personality becomes unbalanced. This is why many people today feel emotionally overwhelmed, even when their external circumstances are not unusually heavy. They suffer from an inner congestion that was meant to be cleared regularly through luminous rest. Thus, the neglect of the Sabbath does not only weaken the mind, it contaminates the emotional field, disconnecting the human being from natural harmony. Chapter 23: The Loss of Conscience and Moral Orientation. One of the gravest consequences of ignoring spiritual rhythms is the dimming of conscience, the inner voice that warns, guides, restrains, and encourages. Conscience is not a product of culture, it is a gift of the Spirit. But the Spirit can only speak when the human being enters a state of inward quiet. The Sabbath provides this quiet. In the silence of a spiritually attuned rest, the voice of conscience becomes clear. It reminds, corrects, warns, and strengthens. But when a person is constantly immersed in noise, activity, entertainment, and intellectual busyness, the fine threads connecting the spirit to conscience become overshadowed. What follows is moral confusion. People begin to justify harmful actions. They lose sensitivity to wrongdoing. They act impulsively, driven by intellect, emotion, or societal pressure rather than inner truth. They mistake convenience for righteousness. Gradually, conscience becomes faint, a distant echo rarely heard. Modern society suffers deeply from this. The rise of corruption, dishonesty, shallow living, and self-centered decisions are symptoms of spirits who no longer pause to listen inwardly. Neglecting the Sabbath is like neglecting a compass. Eventually one drifts off the path without even noticing. The weekly spiritual pause was given so that human beings may realign with the will of God, examine their motives, cleanse their intentions, and correct their direction. When this rhythm is abandoned, morality collapses, not through rebellion but through spiritual disconnection. Chapter 24: Technological Restlessness and Spiritual Numbness. Technology, when used correctly, can serve humanity. But when the Sabbath is ignored, technology becomes a source of relentless stimulation that crowds out all inner life. Screens, notifications, entertainment, constant communication, and digital noise keep the intellect endlessly active. The spirit becomes suppressed. The person loses the ability to be still. Silence becomes uncomfortable. Reflection becomes foreign. They fill every empty moment with distraction, unaware that they are starving their inner being. A human spirit that never pauses becomes numb. Inspiration ceases. Intuition weakens. Creativity dries up. Spiritual perception closes. The person begins to live purely outwardly, like a machine of reactions, impulses, and consumption. This is the new form of slavery, enslavement to restlessness. And it arises directly from the violation of God's law of spiritual rhythm. The Sabbath, rightly understood, is a necessary counterforce to technological overstimulation. It draws the human being away from artificial vibrations and reimmerses him in the natural radiations of creation. It restores depth, awareness, presence, and spiritual sensitivity. Without this weekly detox, technology does not merely occupy time, it consumes the inner life. Thus the neglect of the Sabbath contributes to the rise of a spiritually hollow generation, intelligent, informed, connected, yet inwardly asleep. Chapter 25: Society Without Sabbath, a World Cut Off from Light. When individuals neglect the Sabbath, the consequences affect only their personal lives. But when entire societies abandon spiritual rhythm, the results become catastrophic. A Sabbath-less society is one that glorifies productivity over purpose, values noise over meaning, elevates intellect above spirit, worships technology over humanity, moves at a pace incompatible with inner life. Such a society becomes spiritually dark. Its culture grows shallow. Its institutions become corrupt. Its people become restless, aggressive, and easily manipulated. Crime increases. Depression spreads. Families weaken. Children lose orientation. Leaders become visionless. Communities fracture. This is the world we see today, a world cut off from luminous rhythms. Without the Sabbath, a society becomes like a body deprived of oxygen. It can still move, speak, work, and build, but inwardly it decays. Its achievements lack soul. Its progress lacks direction. Its wealth lacks meaning. Humanity must be reminded. No society can thrive when it ignores the spiritual laws upon which creation rests. And one of these laws is the periodic return to stillness, gratitude, reflection, and reception of light. The Sabbath was not given for religion, but for the preservation of human dignity, clarity, and spiritual health. When forgotten, humanity sinks into confusion and darkness. Part 6. Reclaiming the True Sabbath. How modern humanity can return to purity and radiational harmony. Chapter 26. Restoring the Inner Temple, Silence, Reflection, and Purity. The Sabbath cannot be restored outwardly until it is first restored within the human being. The inner temple is not symbolic, it is a radiational chamber within the spirit. When a person becomes inwardly noisy, restless, scattered, or impure, this inner sanctuary becomes clouded, preventing the inflow of light. The Sabbath was given as a weekly cleansing, a time when the human spirit consciously returns to purity and alignment. Today, humanity lives outwardly active but inwardly abandoned. The intellect has built cities, devices, industries, and technologies, but the spirit remains unfed and exhausted. The Sabbath reopens the inner door. It is the deliberate stepping back from the pressure of daily demands in order to wash the soul in silence. Silence is not empty. Silence is a spiritual condition in which the radiations of the spirit can rise unhindered. In silence, the human being receives strength, clarity, conviction, and renewal from the higher spheres. Reflection also plays a sacred role. It brings order into one's inner world. By examining one's actions, thoughts, shortcomings, and gifts under the quiet light of truth, the human being becomes purified and strengthened. Purity, in the Grail sense, is not moral perfection. It is the natural state of the spirit when it is no longer burdened with foreign burdens, anxieties, confusions, or the debris of uncontrolled thoughts. The Sabbath restores this purity by offering space for the soul to breathe. To restore the Sabbath, the human being must first restore the inner altar, which is silence. Then reflection becomes the offering. And purity becomes the blessing. Chapter 27. Disconnecting from noise, creating Sabbath atmosphere. Modern life is built on constant noise, physical noise, emotional noise, mental noise, and digital noise. Humanity no longer knows stillness, and therefore no longer knows spiritual strength. The Sabbath cannot exist in noise. It requires atmosphere, environment, and conscious separation from the rush of daily existence. To create a Sabbath atmosphere, one must disconnect from everything that drains the spiritual radiations. Digital noise, social media, news, endless notifications. Emotional noise, arguments, complaints, worry, and agitation. Mental noise, planning, calculating, overthinking, and fear. Environmental noise, chaotic surroundings, loud entertainment, restless activity. The human spirit is sensitive. Just as a seed cannot germinate on hard ground, the spirit cannot receive light in turbulence. The Sabbath is the soft soil in which new strength takes root. Creating Sabbath atmosphere may include a quiet, uncluttered space, soft natural light, setting aside work tools, turning off devices, playing harmonious music or nature sounds, lighting a candle to symbolize focus, taking a walk in nature, reading spiritually uplifting texts. What matters is not the form but the withdrawal from the world's turbulence. The Sabbath atmosphere is a radiational shift. When the human being consciously steps into this atmosphere, the spirit breathes again. And in that breath lies renewal, healing, and divine connection. Chapter 28. Re-establishing rhythm in work, rest, and spiritual practice. The human being was created to live in rhythms, not in constant strain. Everything in creation breathes. Day and night, tides and seasons, heartbeat and pulse, flowering and resting. Even the earth rotates in rhythm, and the stars dance in cycles. The Sabbath is humanity's participation in this cosmic order. Modern existence destroys rhythm. Work has no end, rest has no sanctity, and spiritual practice is squeezed into leftover moments. The Sabbath returns rhythm to its rightful place. To re-establish rhythm, work should have boundaries. The intellect must not dominate the entire week. Work belongs to the earth, rest belongs to the spirit. Rest must have intention. Not exhaustion-driven collapse, but purposeful stepping back for inner renewal. Spiritual practice must be consistent. Meditation, prayer, reflection, gratitude, and inner listening should form gentle patterns in daily and weekly life. The week must breathe. The Sabbath is part of the heartbeat of the week, the diastole, where the soul fills with strength to face life anew. The human being who lives without rhythm breaks themselves. The one who returns to rhythm becomes powerful, peaceful, and luminous. The Sabbath reorders life. It teaches balance. It creates space for spirit and body to work together harmoniously again. Chapter 29. Personal Sabbath, Finding Your Day of Alignment. The Sabbath was never about a calendar date. The spiritual laws do not revolve around cultural calendars or religious traditions. What matters is the radiational state of the human being when they withdraw for renewal. Thus, the personal Sabbath is the day that aligns with one's life rhythm, responsibilities, environment, and inner readiness. It may be traditionally observed on a cultural rest day, but it may also be chosen based on one's schedule. This does not make the Sabbath subjective. Its radiational effect is universal, but the human being must enter it consciously. To find your personal Sabbath, consider a day when work can genuinely cease, a time when you are least disturbed, a period when your spirit naturally becomes quiet, a rhythm that you can maintain consistently, a moment when reflection flows easily. Your Sabbath may not be society's Sabbath, and that is acceptable. Creation does not bend to human-made calendars. What matters is alignment, not tradition. The personal Sabbath becomes a weekly sanctuary, a time the spirit anticipates and prepares for. Over weeks and months, this practice reshapes the inner life. It builds strength, clarity, purity, and radiational power. And in this alignment, the human being begins to live consciously again, guided, supported, and awakened. Chapter 30. Family and Community Renewal Through Sacred Rest. The Sabbath is not only for individuals, it is for families, households, and communities. A home that observes the Sabbath radiationally becomes a haven of light. The atmosphere changes, harmony increases, arguments lessen, understanding deepens. Families today live disconnected lives. Children are shaped by screens, parents by stress, and relationships by constant pressure. The Sabbath reintroduces shared stillness, which is one of the greatest forces of healing. Ways families can observe Sabbath together. Sharing a meal prepared with calmness and gratitude. Reading uplifting words together. Sitting in quiet reflection. Walking in nature as a family. Practicing gratitude. Discussing personal insights peacefully. Worshipping or praying together. Disconnecting from devices to reconnect with one another. This creates a radiational field that strengthens everyone. Children raised in such atmospheres develop clarity, inner balance, and moral grounding. Parents rediscover tenderness. Siblings develop respect. Communities built on such homes become stable, peaceful, and spiritually receptive. The Sabbath is a bridge between body and spirit, between individual and community, between humanity and the light. When families honor sacred rest, they build pillars of strength that can withstand the storms of the modern world. A society that returns to Sabbath returns to light. Part 7. Living the Sabbath Daily. Transforming the principle of Sabbath into a lifestyle. Chapter 31. Carrying Stillness into Everyday Decisions. The Sabbath is not merely a day but a principle of alignment with divine rhythm. Carrying this stillness into everyday decisions means cultivating a consciousness that pauses before action. The Grail Message illuminates that human beings are constantly influenced by radiations, vibrations from thoughts, feelings, and intentions. When decisions are made from a restless or hurried state, the soul becomes misaligned, attracting disorder. By consciously invoking Sabbath stillness, one allows the radiations of clarity, wisdom, and inner guidance to permeate each choice. This requires practicing reflection, pausing to ask whether a decision serves truth, harmony, and the greater purpose of the soul. Such alignment ensures that even mundane actions radiate order and light. The habit of integrating restfulness in decision-making protects the human being from unconscious error, promotes inner peace, and gradually attunes the soul to higher guidance. Chapter 32. Practicing Presence and Conscious Living. Living the Sabbath daily entails full presence in each moment. True consciousness is not the fleeting attention of the distracted mind but a steady radiational alignment with life's essence. When the soul remains aware, it perceives both external and internal radiations, recognizing those that uplift versus those that pollute. The Grail Message emphasizes that the inner life directly shapes the outer environment. Presence transforms routine activities into sacred practice. Simple acts, performed with awareness, become instruments of purification, elevating the personal ethereal environment. Conscious living involves rejecting automatic reactions, habitual negativity, and thoughtless speech. By embracing deliberate awareness, the human being cultivates an ongoing Sabbath state, one where the soul is attuned, the mind quieted, and life unfolds with grace and coherence. Chapter 33. Speaking, Working, and Creating from a Place of Rest. Speech, work, and creativity carry radiational weight. The Grail Message reveals that words and actions not aligned with the soul's Sabbath rhythm can scatter energies, create internal disturbance, and influence others negatively. By approaching communication and activity from a state of rest, human beings ensure their radiations are harmonious, precise, and constructive. This requires preparation, entering each engagement with a moment of inner centering, checking for fear, impatience, or selfish desire. Work performed in this manner is more efficient and enduring. Speech becomes a vessel of clarity, not distortion. Creative acts are infused with order and beauty. In this way, the Sabbath principle becomes not an external obligation but a luminous quality embedded in every human endeavor. Chapter 34. The Ethereal Benefits of a Quiet Soul. A quiet soul radiates health, clarity, and spiritual receptivity. Ignorance of the Sabbath principle allows the soul to become cluttered with restless energies, leading to spiritual stagnation and emotional turbulence. Conversely, by living consciously in alignment with the Sabbath, the human being cultivates a radiational environment conducive to growth. The Grail Message explains that the soul's radiations influence both the inner life and the outer circumstances. A serene soul draws opportunities, insight, and harmonious relationships, whereas a disturbed soul attracts disorder and limitation. The ethereal benefit of a quiet soul is the restoration of natural rhythm. Energy flows freely, intuition strengthens, and the human being becomes a conduit of light in the world. Chapter 35. The Continuous Sabbath, Living in the Light Rhythm. The ultimate aim is the continuous Sabbath, a state in which the human being is constantly aligned with the laws of creation. This does not imply passivity but conscious engagement with life from a perspective of rest, clarity, and moral attunement. Daily living infused with Sabbath consciousness allows every thought, action, and word to contribute to inner purification and outward harmony. The Grail Message reminds us that humanity's misalignment stems from neglecting the soul's rhythms, yet restoration is always possible. By embodying the light rhythm, human beings maintain equilibrium amidst challenges, radiate truth, and become instruments of divine order. Living in this perpetual Sabbath state transforms ordinary existence into a spiritual journey of continuous renewal, reflecting the eternal rhythm of creation itself. Part 8. Practical Exercises and Guidance. Tools to help the seeker enter the radiational Sabbath. Chapter 36. Exercises for Inner Stillness and Soul Quieting. The essence of the Sabbath is not simply external rest but the cultivation of inner stillness. True inner quieting allows the soul to align with divine radiations, restoring clarity and spiritual harmony. The Grail Message teaches that human beings are constantly influenced by radiations, both from the external environment and from their own thoughts and emotions. Without deliberate practice, these energies accumulate, producing restlessness, distraction, and spiritual fatigue. Exercise 1. Daily pause for stillness. Set aside specific periods each day to consciously withdraw from activity and external stimuli. Begin with 5 to 10 minutes of quiet sitting, eyes closed, and attention focused inward. Observe thoughts and emotions without judgment, allowing them to pass like clouds. This practice trains the soul to maintain equilibrium amidst the demands of daily life. Exercise 2. Breathing and radiational awareness. Combine slow, conscious breathing with the awareness of inner radiations. With each inhalation, imagine drawing in clarity, peace, and light. With each exhalation, release tension, fear, or mental clutter. This technique harmonizes the physical, emotional, and spiritual layers, preparing the soul to enter a Sabbath-aligned state. Exercise 3. The weekly reflective pause. Dedicate a longer period once a week, ideally coinciding with the day chosen for Sabbath alignment, to reflect on the past week. Review actions, decisions, and emotional reactions. Ask whether they were aligned with truth, light, and moral uprightness. Recognize missteps without self-reproach, and determine conscious corrections for the coming week. This strengthens moral sensitivity and radiational awareness, essential elements of Sabbath living. Exercise 4. Cultivating inner silence amid activity. During routine tasks, work, household chores, or social interactions, practice maintaining a quiet inner observer. Avoid automatic emotional reactions or impulsive judgments. Focus on performing each action with conscious attention, reverence, and alignment with inner guidance. Over time, this transforms ordinary moments into continuous Sabbath practice. Exercise 5. End-of-day radiational purification. Before sleep, consciously review the day's radiations and impressions. Identify negative influences absorbed from surroundings or from inner unrest. Mentally release these energies, imagining them dissolving into light. This practice prevents the accumulation of distorted radiations and ensures the soul rests in purity and clarity, ready for the next cycle of alignment. By consistently engaging in these exercises, the seeker gradually embodies the Sabbath not as an external obligation, but as a living radiational reality. The soul develops resilience against disturbances, heightens moral and ethical perception, and becomes capable of sustaining continuous alignment with creation's laws. Chapter 37. Reflective questions for weekly renewal. The weekly Sabbath is not merely a pause from labor, it is an opportunity for the soul to evaluate, recalibrate, and renew itself. Reflection is the bridge between outer activity and inner alignment. By consciously reviewing one's thoughts, emotions, and deeds, the soul becomes aware of areas needing purification, realignment, and growth. The Grail Message emphasizes that such self-examination must be guided by truth, clarity, and radiational awareness, not by guilt, fear, or superficial ritual. The purpose of reflective questions. Reflective questions serve as a tool for awakening conscience, revealing misalignments, and recognizing radiational disturbances. They allow the seeker to approach life with honesty, seeing the results of actions and inner attitudes on both the personal and ethereal planes. Regular engagement with these questions strengthens moral sensitivity, ethical clarity, and the ability to maintain inner calm even amid worldly pressures. Key reflective questions for weekly renewal. Thoughts and impressions. Which thoughts this week were aligned with truth and clarity, and which caused inner unrest? Were there repeated thought patterns that limited my perception or led to worry or fear? Emotions and radiations. Which emotions dominated my week? Did anger, envy, or impatience distort my inner environment? In which moments did I consciously cultivate peace, gratitude, or joy? Actions and decisions. Which decisions were guided by inner clarity, and which by impulse or external influence? Did my actions contribute positively to my environment, or did they create disturbance for myself or others? Moral and spiritual alignment. Did I act in accordance with universal laws of truth, love, and uprightness? Were there moments when I ignored conscience or allowed convenience to outweigh integrity? Preparation for renewal. How can I correct or release misalignments from this past week? Which practices will I adopt in the coming week to maintain inner clarity and radiational purity? Implementing the practice. Set aside a quiet time, ideally on your chosen Sabbath day, free from distractions. Use a journal to record answers, reflections, and insights. Writing solidifies awareness and creates a tangible record for personal growth. Approach each question with honesty, not self-condemnation. The purpose is purification and strengthening, not guilt. Close the session with a conscious mental release of all negative impressions, visualizing them dissolving into light. By integrating this reflective practice into weekly Sabbath observance, the seeker gradually transforms reflection into intuitive wisdom. Life becomes guided not by external pressures or societal expectation, but by inner alignment, radiational harmony, and moral clarity. This is the true gift of the Sabbath, the renewal of soul and spirit for ongoing conscious living. Chapter 38. Techniques for purifying the inner atmosphere. The inner atmosphere of a human being, the sum of thoughts, emotions, and radiational states, directly influences the quality of their Sabbath and their overall spiritual development. Just as the outer environment can be polluted and requires cleansing, so too does the soul's ethereal environment need purification. The Grail Message teaches that inner clarity, peace, and receptivity are prerequisites for genuine Sabbath rest. Without attention to this inner purification, the Sabbath risks becoming a mere external ritual rather than a transformative spiritual experience. The nature of inner pollution. Negative thoughts, unresolved emotions, habitual fears, and internalized criticism accumulate as radiational disturbances. These distortions block the natural flow of light through the soul and cloud the ability to receive guidance. Often, individuals are unaware of this subtle pollution, yet its effects manifest as restlessness, irritability, and an inability to truly experience the radiational Sabbath. Techniques for purification. Mental cleansing. Begin by observing your thoughts without judgment. Identify recurring patterns of fear, anger, or resentment. Consciously release these thoughts by visualizing them dissolving into radiant light, replacing them with clarity, calm, and gratitude. Emotional release. Acknowledge emotions that disturb inner balance, such as envy, impatience, or regret. Allow these emotions to surface, breathe deeply, and imagine them being purified through a flow of luminous energy circulating through your heart and mind. Radiational alignment. Focus on the central core of your being, the ethereal center of the soul, and consciously align it with the higher radiations of truth, love, and light. Picture these radiations expanding outward, cleansing the subtle energy field around you, harmonizing all inner disturbances. Silence and inner listening. Dedicate periods of stillness where neither thought nor emotion dominates. In this quietude, let the soul feel its natural radiational resonance and observe how negative patterns lose power in the presence of pure attention. Regular practice. Integrate these purification techniques into your weekly Sabbath as well as daily moments of reflection. Consistency strengthens the inner atmosphere and enhances the soul's ability to receive guidance and peace. The outcome of purification. As the inner atmosphere becomes purified, the human being experiences greater receptivity to spiritual impulses and inner guidance, emotional equilibrium and clarity of thought, a more harmonious radiational field that positively influences others. The ability to observe the Sabbath not as a constraint, but as a sanctuary of rejuvenation for both body and soul. The essence of these techniques is not mechanical repetition but conscious engagement. By committing to purifying the inner atmosphere, the seeker gradually transforms the Sabbath into a radiationally alive period, an authentic encounter with divine rhythm and the light of creation. Chapter 39. Radiational exercises for calm, clarity, and receptivity. The Sabbath is not merely a day of physical rest, it is a radiational reality that requires the soul to be attuned to the higher laws of creation. The human being's capacity to receive light, guidance, and inner refreshment depends largely on the state of their radiational field, the subtle interplay of thought, emotion, and will. Disturbed or scattered radiations hinder this receptivity, while concentrated and harmonious radiations open the soul to clarity, calm, and divine impulses. The Grail Message emphasizes that cultivating such radiational harmony is both a practical and spiritual requirement for authentic Sabbath observance. Understanding the radiational state. Every thought, feeling, and inner intention emits a vibration. Positive, truthful, and loving radiations support inner peace and receptivity. Negative, chaotic, or fear-laden radiations disrupt the soul's alignment. On the Sabbath, the goal is to consciously create an inner state that allows light to flow freely through the human being. This requires deliberate practice, awareness, and the gentle guidance of the will. Exercises to cultivate calm, clarity, and receptivity. The radiational centering exercise. Sit in a quiet place, close your eyes, and focus on the center of your being, your soul core. Visualize a radiant light within, like a sun, slowly expanding and filling your inner space. With each inhalation, draw in clarity and calm. With each exhalation, release tension, worry, or scattered thoughts. Repeat for 10 to 15 minutes, allowing the soul to stabilize in a calm radiational state. Conscious breath alignment. Inhale deeply, imagining the breath harmonizing your mental, emotional, and spiritual radiations. Exhale slowly, letting go of dissonant or discordant energies. Focus on the rhythm of breath as a conductor for inner radiational alignment. This exercise links the physical act of breathing with subtle energy harmonization. Radiational reflection. Reflect on your week with a conscious awareness of your inner radiations. Identify moments when your energy was scattered, negative, or reactive. Consciously transform these moments into lessons, expressing gratitude for guidance and insight gained. This practice not only purifies the past week's energy but strengthens receptivity for the Sabbath's renewal. Light visualization. Visualize a soft, radiant light descending from above, enveloping your entire being. Imagine this light permeating every cell, thought, and emotion, dissolving all heaviness and distraction. Feel yourself opening to receive subtle impressions of truth, guidance, and inner insight. Silent receptive sitting. Dedicate 5 to 10 minutes to complete silence, neither engaging in thought nor reacting emotionally. Simply allow yourself to exist as a receptive soul, observing the natural flow of radiations. This strengthens the ability to remain undisturbed and clear, creating a fertile inner space for the Sabbath's restorative effects. The benefits of radiational exercises. When practiced consistently, these exercises cultivate a calm, grounded presence that endures beyond the Sabbath. Heightened clarity in decision-making and discernment. Enhanced receptivity to spiritual impulses, inner guidance, and creative insight. An inner sanctuary that shields the soul from chaotic radiations in the external environment. By integrating radiational exercises into Sabbath observance, the human being does not merely rest outwardly but aligns inwardly with the rhythm of creation. The Sabbath thus becomes a true period of spiritual rejuvenation, a sacred opportunity to strengthen, clarify, and harmonize the soul's radiational life. Chapter 40. Building a lifelong practice of sacred rest. The Sabbath is not merely a weekly ritual, it is a lifelong practice of inner alignment, radiational clarity, and spiritual nourishment. True Sabbath observance transcends physical rest. It is a conscious cultivation of stillness, purity, and receptivity that must gradually be woven into the fabric of one's life. The Grail Message teaches that the human being's inner environment is shaped by consistent practice. Only through sustained effort can the soul maintain a stable radiational field conducive to higher guidance and inner calm. Understanding the lifelong dimension of the Sabbath. The human spirit is in constant interaction with invisible radiations, those of others, the environment, and one's own inner life. Neglecting spiritual rest allows chaotic radiations to accumulate, producing mental fatigue, emotional turbulence, and diminished receptivity. Building a lifelong Sabbath practice ensures that these disturbances are consistently cleared, creating a sanctuary within the soul where light can flow freely. This sanctuary is not limited to one day but extends its effects into all aspects of life, enabling the human being to live with clarity, discernment, and inner peace. Key principles for a lifelong practice. Consistency over perfection. The soul grows through steady repetition rather than occasional bursts of effort. Even brief, daily moments of conscious rest, reflection, or inner silence accumulate to create lasting radiational stability. Understand that lapses are natural, the goal is continual realignment, not perfection. Integration into daily life. Beyond the formal Sabbath day, infuse ordinary activities with moments of presence, mindfulness, and reflection. Align tasks with inner rhythm. Work, rest, and spiritual practice should be integrated rather than segregated. Recognize that every action can either harmonize or disrupt the soul's radiational environment. Cultivation of inner silence. Dedicate time each day to quiet the intellect, release scattered thoughts, and attune to higher guidance. Silent contemplation strengthens the soul's capacity to receive subtle impressions and remain undisturbed in the face of external turbulence. Periodic review and renewal. Weekly reflection on personal radiations helps identify patterns of disharmony, emotional overload, or mental fatigue. Adjust habits, thoughts, and behaviors to support continued clarity and receptivity. This conscious review turns the Sabbath into a dynamic, evolving practice rather than a static ritual. Connection with higher principles. Approach the Sabbath as alignment with the laws of creation, not as obligation or duty. Meditate on truth, love, and uprightness. Allow these radiations to permeate your being, The deeper the connection to spiritual principles, the more restorative and transformative the Sabbath becomes. Practical exercises for lifelong integration. Daily micro-Sabbaths. Pause several times during the day for 5 to 10 minutes of conscious stillness, observing your thoughts, feelings, and radiations. Weekly reflection ritual. Review the week's actions and inner states, noting lessons learned and areas requiring purification. Radiational visualization. Visualize a light-filled sanctuary within yourself, which expands and permeates your surroundings, reinforcing calm and receptivity. Conscious work and rest. Alternate periods of focused activity with intentional quiet, ensuring that work does not scatter the soul's energies. The long-term rewards. A profound sense of inner balance, calm, and resilience. Heightened clarity of thought, enhanced discernment, and improved decision-making. An environment of radiational purity that naturally draws guidance, inspiration, and opportunities. A living connection to creation's rhythms, where the Sabbath is not an isolated event but a continuous flow of harmony and light. By embracing these principles and exercises, the seeker transforms the Sabbath from a mere external observance into a lifelong, radiationally harmonious practice. The soul becomes its own sanctuary, a sacred space where inner rest, clarity, and receptivity are sustained, enabling a life fully attuned to the laws of creation. Conclusion. The return to divine rhythm. The Sabbath, at its deepest essence, is not a mere day or ritual, it is a rhythm inscribed in the very laws of creation. Humanity, in its forgetfulness, has lost touch with this rhythm, mistaking rest for idleness, silence for emptiness, and spiritual alignment for ritual compliance. The Grail Message clarifies that returning to the divine rhythm is an inner work, a conscious reorientation of the soul toward the natural laws that govern thought, feeling, and action. Rest, reflection, and inner stillness are not concessions to weakness but instruments of spiritual strength. When the human being aligns with this rhythm, they harmonize their personal radiational environment with the eternal currents of light and order. In practice, this requires both awareness and discipline. Moments of silence, meditation, conscious work, and reflection become channels through which higher guidance flows. A true return to divine rhythm transforms life. Ordinary activities are suffused with presence, every interaction resonates with clarity, and the soul experiences a profound sense of inner balance. The Sabbath is thus a mirror reflecting the human being's alignment with creation. The purer the alignment, the greater the peace, insight, and inner radiance. This return is not merely for spiritual elites but is the path open to all who earnestly seek to live in harmony with the laws of life. Epilogue. The coming purification and the true Sabbath of humanity. Humanity stands at the threshold of a new awakening. The coming purification, as revealed in the Grail Message, is not a punishment but a restoration, a sweeping away of distraction, confusion, and inner disorder. In this purification, the true Sabbath will emerge not as a day imposed by law but as a universal rhythm of spiritual, mental, and emotional renewal. The chaos of modern life, with its endless labor, noise, and superficial activity, obscures the inner sanctuary within each soul. As individuals awaken to the necessity of rest and inner alignment, society itself begins to transform. Conflict diminishes, moral clarity returns, and radiational harmony spreads outward, creating communities and nations aligned with higher principles. The true Sabbath, therefore, is both a personal and collective phenomenon. It is the space in which conscience awakens, the intellect rests, and the soul receives guidance. It is a daily and weekly practice, a lifestyle of presence, clarity, and alignment. In the coming era, humanity will rediscover the sacred rhythm, and through it, the world will be reordered according to truth, light, and justice. The purification will separate what is ephemeral from what is eternal, leaving only those living in accord with the divine rhythm to flourish. Appendix. Meditations, reflections, and weekly Sabbath practices. The practical application of the Sabbath principle requires exercises that foster inner clarity and radiational harmony. These tools, grounded in the Grail Message, guide the seeker toward sustained spiritual alignment. 1. Daily micro-meditations. Take 5 to 10 minutes each morning and evening to quiet the intellect, focus on conscious breathing, and visualize a sphere of light surrounding the self. Observe thoughts and feelings without judgment, allowing them to pass like clouds while maintaining inner stillness. 2. Weekly reflective practices. Dedicate a specific period each week for reflection on thoughts, actions, and feelings. Ask, where did I act from clarity? Where was I distracted or reactive? Journal insights, lessons, and intentions for purification and realignment. 3. Radiational exercises. Visualize harmful or chaotic radiations leaving your inner space and being replaced by light, clarity, and calm. Practice consciously sending radiations of goodwill, gratitude, and light to others and the environment. 4. Integrating Sabbath principles into daily life. Alternate periods of focused work with moments of inner silence. Engage in tasks mindfully, avoiding mechanical or distracted action. Use pauses during meals, walks, or routines to consciously attune to spiritual rhythms. 5. Family and community renewal practices. Share periods of reflective silence or discussion with loved ones to create a collective radiational alignment. Observe mutual support, gratitude, and cooperative effort as extensions of personal Sabbath practice. 6. Long-term cultivation. Maintain consistency rather than perfection. Even brief moments of awareness accumulated over time strengthen the soul's radiational field. Use setbacks as opportunities to refine awareness and recommit to alignment with divine rhythm. Through these meditations, reflections, and practices, the human being gradually internalizes the Sabbath as a living rhythm, one that restores inner clarity, uplifts consciousness, and harmonizes the personal and collective ethereal environment. The Sabbath ceases to be an external imposition and becomes the continuous heartbeat of a life aligned with the laws of creation.